Hey everyone, this is Dr. Ripley, and this mini lecture is on data, quick introduction to types of data and the types of graphs that are the most common ones that we're going to use. Now, this cartoon on the first page is just to remind me to say that an honest and um, skilled ethical statistician is always going to try and interpret the data that they have in a way that is accurate as the best of their ability. However, if you don't know anything about data, ways to present data, then you can easily be misled by somebody who is unethical. So this is an important skill that you need in order to be able to have both information and data literacy. All right, first of all, real quick, what are data and statistics? Any individual piece of information we can consider data, and a single one is called a datum, although not everybody uses that term. A statistic can also be used to talk about a specific piece of information, but usually it's a quantity that we've calculated from a set of data. So percent, a proportion, an average, a summary of some kind. And when we talk about statistics, plural, we're usually referring to the discipline or the study of collecting, organizing, analyzing, interpreting, and presenting data. All right, an important thing to understand when we're trying to understand data is this concept of a variable. So a variable is any kind of measurement or observable characteristic of individuals or groups of individuals that can differ between them. All right, so if there's something that's exactly the same on every individual, we could measure it over and over and over again, and it's never any different, then it's not a variable. It's not interesting to us to study. Um, but anything that can be different, right? So, um, and we'll call these variables either a quantitative variable if it's measured as a number, or a categorical variable if it's more of a kind of thing. Right? So quantitative variables are going to be numerical. They're usually measurements that we're making, like the weight of this adorable chihuahua here on the scale. And because they're numbers, we can use them in calculations. We can calculate their mean. We can calculate various indexes that are made using those numbers. And another way to describe them is continuous. So when we're looking at the weight of this chihuahua, for example, it could be 25. It could be 25.2. It could be 25.30796 if we had a precise enough scale. All right, so continuous means that it could take on any value that's possible using the measuring instrument that we have. And most of the things you think about as measurements we take on an individual, your dog's weight, its height, values of its concentration of different solutes in a blood sample. Those are all quantitative. And there's a surprising number of these categorical variables. So they're not necessarily numerical, although they could be numbers if they're basically used as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's nothing in between them. Right. So we're sort of using numbers as if they're different categories. All right, so they're not continuous. So an example that makes sense is dog breeds. So we put each dog that we see into a category of its breed. So we can call them German Shepherd, um, uh, Labrador Retriever, Dachshund, right? And there's nothing in between Dachshund and Labrador Retriever, right? So we can't take an average of Dachshund and Labrador Retriever. And when we're putting those on the graph, it may be convenient to put them in alphabetical order, but there's really no intrinsic ordering to them, right? So some other categorical variables for our dogs could be coat type. They could be what group they're in terms of, are they retrievers? Are they toy dogs? Are they guard dogs? We could have different types of ears or color patterns, so that those would be things we could look at each individual and say, oh, it's this kind of thing. All right. So when we have the list of all the kinds of things, when we're looking at individuals that way, those are going to be our categorical variables. All right, to look at how we might summarize quantitative variables, typically we're going to calculate a mean and standard deviation to summarize a data set that's of a quantitative variable, like this example using days. Um, Another quantity what we might find is the value of the middle observation in the data set, the median. And we'll have an example in a separate video of calculating these summary values. So quantitative variables can have numerical summary values. And we're going to use certain types of graphs to present data that is from quantitative variables. A common one, although it's not very um, exciting, what we can see using a histogram, it's always going to have whatever our quantitative variable is across the x-axis here. And this is weight um, in kilos of adult Chihuahuas. So notice that on the y-axis, we have percentage of the population. Now, we also have two groups of individuals, males and females. So that's a categorical variable. And we can see from this graph that most Chihuahuas fall into this kind of middle area. So even though we've noted males and females on here, there's not that much difference between their weights. We can estimate where the mean of these data is going to be. And we can also look at the range, how far along the x-axis. So notice this gives, for example, for females, 2.3 to 3.3 kilograms. That's basically the smallest observation and the largest observation. So in this example, we're seeing how weights are distributed across the x-axis and how many individuals out of the whole population we're going to find with that particular weight. Another type of graph we'll see used for a quantitative variable is a line graph. And basically, we're going to see a line going across it. This one has multiple lines. We'll often see that when we want to compare two different categories to one another. So not only do we have a quantitative variable on this graph, but we've also added categories that help us explain the difference in adult size. So we end up with dogs that are between 4 pounds and 140 pounds. How do we make sense of that size range? Well, there's different kinds of dogs that are in these different categories: toy, small, medium, etc., and giant. So we can see that for toy breeds, they start to grow pretty slowly and they get to their adult size by a year. They aren't growing anymore. However, the larger dog breeds, they grow faster, um, but it takes them longer to get to maturity. So this graph, they're still growing after 18 months. So we can see um, that the the dog's age, right, is the x-axis variable, and weight in pounds is the y-axis variable. So we've made repeated measurements over these times on the same dogs. Now, these are probably means of many individuals that were calculated, and often we'll actually see dots, and then the line is connecting the dots together. All right, so what you can take home from this graph is that these different groups of dog sizes um, all grow, some of them more rapidly, others a little more slowly. And then as the larger the dog gets, the longer time it takes to get them to their adult size. All right, here's another example of a line graph. This one also has not dog age, but it has a measure of time across the x-axis from 2013 to 2017. And on the y-axis, we have rank. So just what was the most popular American Kennel Club breeds? It's always Labrador Retrievers. It's been that way for a long time. So they're ranked number one, German Shepherds number two, number three. But when we get to the dogs that are below those in rankings, we've seen that there have been some different changes in popularity. For example, French Bulldogs have increased from rank 11 all the way up to rank 4 in that time period. All right, so we can have dog breeds on here as a categorical variable. Rank is actually a categorical variable, but we can use it as a numerical variable because it's in numerical order. All right, so again, we have the popularity at each year, and those are tied together with a line for each particular breed. That's what makes it a line graph. When we have categorical variables, one of the common ways we'll show those is on a pie chart, and those show the percent or proportion of the whole that are in each category. So this example is for dog genetics. So this is the kind of result you get from a company if you send in a sample of your dog's DNA and say, I want to know it's a mutt, I want to know what kind of breeds it's made up of. And this graph is showing that 25%, this wedge, the darkest one and the largest one, is Labrador Retriever. And then each of the other pie wedges, each representing 12.5%, are spread out across different dog breeds. All right, so this dog, how we interpret the genetic information is how far back it has parents or grandparents or great grandparents that were of these different purebred breeds. We're pretty familiar with pie charts, but one important thing to keep in mind is that we have 100% of the genetic ancestry of this individual represented in this graph. And that is the situation for when we want to use a pie chart. All right, if we have done a survey where we've said, hey, what kind of pet do you have? And people could answer more than one answer. So they could say, oh, I have a dog and I have a cat. That's going to give us percentages that add up to more than 100%. Right? We can't use a pie chart for that. They have to be things that are the only things that are possible out of the question that we asked. So this pie chart is showing that we have about 2/3 of people surveyed who are current pet owners, 20% were previous pet owners, and 13% were non-pet owners. And then the survey followed up on what kind of pet do these current pet owners have? So we can't make a, a pie chart out of that or show it in these wedges because they were allowed to answer more than one different kind of pet. All right, so we could summarize this graph as showing, well, 50% of respondents had a dog, which was by far the most, and then a cat, and then only 9% had freshwater fish, and then all the other types were even fewer. So by far the most common pet types were dog. Right, and this is called a bar chart because you have these bars that are showing. Now it does have a y-axis that is percent, but since it's showing the actual percent on each one of the bars, that's an alternate way to show the value. All right, so we can do a lot more fancy things with bar graphs. We can compare a lot of different values across multiple categorical variables. All right, so if we make a pie chart, we can only show one country at a time. But if we make a bar chart, for example, we can look at, instead of Um, how common is it to own a dog just in the US, which we could do using a pie chart, but a bar chart, we can collect data from lots of different countries, and then we can show them next to one another. So Mexico has the highest percent of respondents with a dog in their household compared to all these other countries. All right, so these countries could be put down here across this x-axis in alphabetical order in some kind of geographic order, but they've been ordered on this graph as they often are, just showing from highest to lowest. All right, that's part of the reason we know this is a categorical variable country. All right, on the right-hand side, we can show not only what country, and this one only has 5 countries, United States, China, UK, Germany, and Japan, but we have 2 bars for each country. We have a bar for the United States for dogs, shown in blue, and in green for cats. So we see how this graph is organized. It's got the dogs to the left and the cats to the right in these 2 different colors for each of these countries. When we look across the whole graph, we see the percent of cat ownership is about the same across all these different countries. It goes between 40 and 51%, but that is, within a 10% difference. However, if we look at dogs, we see the United States has pet owners that whether they have a dog or cat, right? Is so this is a little bit different statistic than the graph on the left. If you're thinking, oh, that doesn't match. This is what respondents have a dog in their household, right? So there's some percentage of people that don't have a pet and don't have a dog, right? But on the right-hand graph, we've asked pet owners whether they have a dog, yes or no, and whether they have a cat, yes or no. Out of pet owners, 74% in the US have a dog, 47% in the US have a cat. So this graph is arranged with decreasing amounts of dog ownership across from the left to the right. So again, this graph creator has decided to put the countries in that particular order because it makes it easy to see this pattern. All right, so take home message is that we have quite a different amount of dog ownership across these same 5 countries, with the highest in the US and then decreasing to Japan, which only has 48% dog ownership, right? We don't know why. None of these graphs tell us why we see those patterns. Those are just the patterns that we see. That's all we can say. If you want to go on and find out more about maybe why countries have these different patterns, that is something that you cannot infer just from this graph. All right, so we're well on our way to starting to be able to look at different data types, look at different variables, see how they're used to try and show patterns in the data, and this is an incredibly useful skill.